Welcome to the Big Book Club. I'm Damian Barr. Our theme this week is class. I grew up just down the road in Motherwell, but it's taken me all this time to reach the dizzy heights of Hamilton. From rags to riches, for better or for worse, from Shameless to Downton, we remain obsessed by how the other half live. But why? And what does class even mean now? Tonight, we'll drink Buckfast and champagne, meet Neds and Aristos, and discover what it was like to be a child during the Troubles in 1980s Belfast. My class acts are Paul McVeigh, Graham Armstrong, and Jessica Fellows. We'll have poetry from Courtney Stoddart. I'll also try to catch up with the Readers on the Run book group from Alwa. Growing up, I loved watching Brideshead with my mum. It was a window into a glamorous other world of castles and titles and dynastic drama. Even card-carrying communists love stories about posh people. But why? My first guest was once deputy editor of Country Life magazine and actually wrote the books on Downton. She's here with the fourth novel in her sparkling Mitford murder series. It's the fabulous Jessica Fellows. It's
Thanks,
lovely
Damien.
to have you here. It's so delightful.
Yeah, it's great to be back in Scotland.
So, Jessica, this is the world premiere. The book is not even out yet.
No.
Very exciting. Will you give us a wee reading?
Yes, absolutely. I'm very happy to. So I'm going to read just from the very beginning, because why not? Chapter 1, 15th of October, 1932. When the morning arrived, Louisa Cannon, as she still was, lay for a while between the sheets, looking up to the ceiling as she studied the contents of her mind. She had slept deeply in an unfamiliar bedroom and wondered now if this was perhaps not a good thing. Weren't nerves expected, possibly even necessary? A display of excitement and trepidation from what lay ahead was conventional, even if one was hopeful and optimistic. Yet Louisa was sure that she felt completely calm and safe, as if she knew she had been away too long and was at last on her way home. At that moment, she heard noises on the landing, a shuffling of feet and fervent whispers beyond her door. Louisa smothered her laughter as the brass doorknob turned slowly and a voice of protestation was hushed severely. She saw 3 sisters standing in the doorway, looking at her with huge eyes, the smallest girl hopping from foot to foot with her usual impatience. "It's all right," said Louisa. "You can come in." "Nanny said we weren't to disturb," the tall blonde said. "But I knew you wouldn't mind." This was Jessica, known to all as Decca, 15 years old and with a determined set to her mouth, hardly different in temperament from the 3-year-old with long curls Louisa met when she arrived to work for the Mitford family. Then there had been 5 young sisters and 1 brother. The youngest, Deborah, had not yet been born. She came up now to Louisa's bedside, her blonde hair cropped to just below her ears, and handed over a piece of folded card. "I pressed some cornflowers for you," said Deborah. "Something blue." She smiled shyly, and Louisa smiled back. "Thank you, Miss Deborah. I shall keep them in my pocket and they'll bring me luck, I suppose. I'd better get up. There's somewhere I've got to be, isn't there?"
Oh, lovely. That's so sweet. So that's Miss Louisa Cannon, as she is there for the minute,
Yes.
on her way. She's getting married later that day
Yes.
to the handsome Guy Sullivan.
Yes.
I love that most people, when they're doing readings, have to do the posh impression, and you have to do the common bit. It's like just trying to get into that mood, trying to get into that mode of doing it. This is the 4th in that series of Mitford books, and obviously we see the sisters grow older through them, and we see Louisa grow older. But just take us back to the beginning and tell us, first of all, who Louisa is.
Who Louisa is.
And then we'll talk more about the
first book, The Mitford Murders, starts in 1919, and so Nancy Mitford she's kind of coming out of the schoolroom at that age. She's 17, 18. And in those days, you have to remember that, when you're coming out of the schoolroom, it was a sharp exit from being a really little girl. My mother said you went from socks to stockings overnight. But there wasn't that sort of teenager gap. You were a child till you were 17, and then you were a young woman. But obviously with that comes all the trepidation and anxiety, and there's a big build-up to it and so on. So it's about that moment with Nancy Mitford.
So it's important. So that's what happens if you're of Nancy's class.
Yes.
If you're of Louisa's class.
then Louisa, came from London, where she had stopped school at 14, which was fairly standard. And due to various kind of disturbing circumstances, she needs to get out of London. And through the friend of a friend, she lands at the Mitford's doorstep. And what I wanted really was that moment in the nursery where Nancy's trying to find out who she's going to be next. And Louisa is given this opportunity suddenly into a whole world that she's not she's not been inside of at all. She's glimpsed, and it is that moment that we don't actually know about with Nancy Mitford. We don't know exactly who she was, so that was quite fun to write.
I think the joy of the novels, and I've read all 4 of them, is that we get that insider-outsider perspective, because Louisa's working class, so she brings a really different element to the story, which is very useful because there's at least one murder in every single book. So she asks questions that maybe the posh people wouldn't think to access. And she has direct experience of criminality through her uncle.
Yeah.
But let's talk about the Mitfords. So there were 6 sisters?
6 sisters and 1 brother who was killed in the Second World War. So that's sort of partly why I think we've never really heard of him, whereas the sister mostly lived a fairly long life. But what's fascinating about them is if you tried to pitch these sisters as a fiction idea, you'd get laughed out of the room because you wouldn't believe that it's true. But you've got 6 sisters who all came of age in that between the wars era, and they each represent something of that period. So Nancy is your cocktail-drinking, satirical novelist. She's got a very sharp eye for her own class. Pamela came next. I think of her as the sort of the steady one of the family, the rock, while all the rest of them are sort of pinging off and going a bit mad. The third one was Diana, who was the most beautiful. She first of all married a very rich man called Brian Guinness when she was 19, and then she left him for Oswald Mosley, who was the leader of the British Fascist Party, and she became great friends with Hitler, and she got married in Goebbels' drawing room with Hitler as a witness.
Oh God,
so,
I'm just
we're not just
imagining
talking someone who quite likes fascism. That's someone who, they really get in there.
So Hitler was the witness at a wedding, and it was in Goebbels' front room. So just delightful. I'm just imagining the wedding pictures.
Yeah,
That's
well, it gets worse, because then you get Unity, who was just obsessed with Hitler and fascism generally. But, I mean, she went to Munich and she sat in Osteria, Bavaria, which was the restaurant that Hitler used to have lunch in, until he noticed her. And then he did notice her, and they became great friends. And then you have Jessica, who ran off with her cousin Esmond Romilly, who was nephew of Winston Churchill, and they went off to Spain to fight Franco. So they were communists, die-hard communists. She actually left the Communist Party in America because it wasn't left-wing enough. So, I mean, you're really talking polar opposites. And then the youngest was Deborah, who became the Duchess of Devonshire. So you've got novelist, countrywoman, fascist, communist, duchess.
Wow. Christmas at their house. The arguments. We think it's bad now, like bringing up Trump, but
That was the fascination. And also what's brilliant about them is that they all wrote to each other copiously. So there's thousands and thousands and thousands of letters. So, and what is really good about that is that you realise they're just like any other family, and they disagree all the time, and they disagree about quite fundamental facts sometimes, about how they were brought up and who their parents were and what happened when. And so that really, I felt that gave me licence as a novelist to use them in imaginary situations.
Did the letters not make it harder? Or did they make it harder, or did they make it easier?
I don't think it makes it easier. I mean, I think I made a decision quite early on. I'm not writing biographies. I like to put in details that Mitford fans recognise or that are interesting to learn, and I like authentic historical points, but I really want to look at the gaps in between the facts. What got them from there to there.
Just going back to the time that it's set, I mean, it was really interesting reading it, how prescient it is to now. There's the Oswald Mosley, when he appears, his very first words are, "We must protect freedom of speech."
I know. But I mean, he was, the parallels between then and now, have been going on for such a long time. In terms of, when I first started doing some of the Downton work, I was thinking a lot about the parallels between 100 years ago and now. I don't know if that's because that really is uniquely the case, or because history is just so cyclical that every 100 years or so, that's kind of how it revolves. You know, just that rise of fascism, but also that thing of people seeing it happen elsewhere, but not quite taking it on board. They sort of know that it's going on, and it's not very nice, but they're not really going to do very much about it.
What's that about? Is that about... I mean, it did seem to me a little bit in this book, you know, the bit where the guy turns up in his Nazi uniform to a cocktail party, and the first thought somebody has is, oh, how dashing he looks. Why was it not more called out?
People were frightened of communism, and they saw the alternative as being Bolsheviks or fascists. And if you were anybody with money or land or a title or history, then communism was just not on. You know, you just weren't even going to, just on any level, you weren't going to encounter that. And a lot of quite frightening stories had come out of communism already, but, you know, by that point. So fascism just looked more attractive. And there were people who did call it out, but there wasn't really, you have to remember, there was not much infrastructure to...
There was no Twitter.
There was no Twitter. I mean, you got your news once a day, more or less, and you only got it from one source, of the BBC radio, or you got it from your one newspaper that you read. You weren't looking at a broad deliverance of news. You weren't getting anything on the ground. And the foreign news section, I mean, I read a lot of newspaper archives and so on, and, you know, you would look and there would be our Italian correspondent, you know, and some tiny little bit about what Mussolini is doing. People like Hitler were very effective at suppressing the news they didn't want to get out and putting out. He also knew how to put out the messages that he did want.
Do you know where the books end? Because there'll be 7, right?
There were 6 actually. And on, you know, in fairness, for gender balance, I should really have given Tom his own book, but he makes an appearance in here. But there'll be 6 altogether, so I'm just about to start the 5th one now, which is Jessica.
Will you be glad to be done with the Mitfords when you're finished with them? Have they slightly taken over your life, or will you miss them?
Oh, no, I think I will miss it. They're not terribly likeable, the Mitford sisters, and I have found, particularly the books with Diana and Unity, and having to be in some pretty dark places and trying to work out who they were and what their mindset was. You know, it wasn't always the most pleasant. How
do you do that as a writer, though? How do you write characters? Because I think people think of them as sort of being jolly and harmless, but when you're talking about actual fascism...
No, they weren't.
That's as grim as it gets. So.
I mean, Diana was really quite a complicated one. I met someone who worked for her, and she kept saying, oh, but she was so lovely. She was such, you know, she was the most marvellous hostess and things. And I was like, she was, you know, I'm sure she was very charming, but she never... went back on her word about Hitler. I mean, there's an interview with her on Desert Island Disc in the 1980s where she refuses to denounce Hitler.
In the 1980s?
Yes, and Sue Lawley, who interviewed her at the time, sort of mentions the Holocaust, you know, and she said, well, I think the numbers are a bit exaggerated or something like that. You know, it was really quite nasty stuff.
Yeah.
And so actually, when you get into it, you think, well, it's pretty shocking.
But you don't shy away from that in the books, and I think that's what's lovely. I think there's a danger that people might, you know, think, oh, it's kind of, you know, confected or it's jolly or you're excusing it. You're not. You know, I think people will learn about. I think people will learn about the rise of fascism and how, you know, how these people who were sort of quite jolly and lovely at parties were actually.
I think there is a lesson to take. There's a lesson to take in that, you know, because it was happening, and as you say, you know, why wasn't it getting called out?
Yeah.
And so now, if you see it, call it out now, because this is. You know, the end result of not calling it out is that people continue to gain power. You
mentioned Downton earlier, which was written by your uncle, and you wrote the companion books for it and immersed yourself kind of thoroughly in that world. And you did lots of tours in America.
Yes.
And I wondered what Americans thought about it. And
they loved it. I mean, it was huge fun, sort of taking Downton to America, as it were. I mean, I just wrote, just always to be clear, Julian wrote the scripts for Downton, and I just wrote the books that were about the show and how it was made and the social history context. It was always great fun to go, because I always said it was like doing sort of wedding speeches, really, because you would turn up and everyone was just really wanting a Downton party, and they would quite often be in costume. And what I realised was that it provided a kind of community. I mean, it almost in real life, you know, a house like Downton would have been the focus of attention for gossip for the surrounding village, and that was effectively what was going on with the TV show. It just became this village that people could come together and discuss. But I did always ask Americans, why? Why are you so interested in what this sort of slightly random group of people are doing off a small island in the north of Europe, you know? And they said, because we don't have a royal family. So I think because of the way Britain was 100 years ago with its empire sort of outreaches, there are a lot of countries that feel a connection with Britain, for better or for worse, you know, and so I think there's a sort of sense of ownership going on there with how the country was.
Jessica, thank you so much for joining me and bringing the Mitfords too.
Thank you.
My next guest is one of those writers I can't get enough of. Paul McVeigh is to Belfast what Irvine Welsh is to Leith or Kerry Hudson is to Aberdeen. His stories, whether fiction or memoir, reveal the rich and vivid working-class world of Belfast, from the Troubles to now. His debut novel, The Good Son, won all the prizes, and he's just edited the first collection of working-class voices from Ireland. Prepare to fall in love with wee Dolores, our Gerard, and all the rest of them. It's Paul McVeigh.
How are you doing? Thank you.
It's very lovely to have you here. So, Paul, you're going to read from Common People, which is a collection we've both got pieces in, edited by the lovely Kit Duval.
Okie dokie. The older ones take turns to mind us while Ma goes to work at night. We like it when the girls mind us, as they let us stay up later and watch movies with us on the sofa. Sometimes they buy us wee parties, which consist of a packet of crisps and juice, and if we're lucky, sweets. And in return, we let them go out and we mind ourselves. The three older girls live in the room next to us, and when wee Dolores gets bigger, she'll have to move in there with them. Older girls do all the cleaning, cooking, and bring us wee ones up. The usual sort of things that daughters do. They're basically other mummies, except they don't hit us. Alex never has anything to do, yet he's the grumpiest, and he does hit us. That's funny. And also, he doesn't work either. It must be a boy thing. This is the new improved McVeigh family residence, since the housing executive came and built extensions in all the houses on our street, giving us an extra bedroom, fancy, and an indoor toilet, smell us. Well, not literally, because that would be disgusting. Before that, in here, me, Dolores and Da shared a double bed, while Alec and Gerard had the bunks. And next door had all the big girls plus Ma, 2 to a bunk bed. I won't ask you to imagine what it was like when Uncle Martin and Aunt Elizabeth moved in for a while and there was 11 of us in a 2-bedroom house. How did Ma and Da manage to have so many babies when they didn't even share a bedroom? Meanwhile, back at the ranch, they're screaming from the alley at the back of the house where someone is getting a community beating by the IRA for being antisocial. I know, let's play I Spy, says me, to distract wee Dolores. But it's dark, she says. Well, see, what you've got to do is remember what's in the room. It's an even harder game that way. It's called I Spy in the Dark, or I Can't I Spy. I hear her sucking her ball. She still sucks it, even though she's far too old. Okay, I say, I can't spy with my little eye because it's dark, she giggles. Something beginning with B. Bed, says she. Yes, brilliant. Your go, says me. There's thumping coming up the stairs. You got us into trouble, says Gerard. But he can't have heard me, says me. Wee Dolores flies up to my end of the bed, in beside me, and we pull the covers up over our heads.
Oh, amazing. Now, that's not the Mitfords, is it? That's a whole other world. But with very scary politics in it. That expression, I'd never heard the expression community beatings before.
Yes. Let me tell you that there was very little theft or anything that, you know, it was, people were afraid, you know, and, but it was brutal. I mean, they had hurley sticks. You don't play hurley over here, do you? It's hurling would be like hockey, I suppose, only they're big, fatter ends. And you would, that's how they would get your knees. And then after, if you kept repeating these crimes, they would just shoot them off, shoot your kneecaps off.
Jesus. And that's what you grew up in. The way you write about it in this story, because it's actually a very jolly, funny family story about you and your siblings all kind of climbing into the bed together and having fun and teasing one another, and you know, and every now and then there's a line that just stops you in your tracks. You know, there was the thing about having to close the blinds and being careful to close the blinds so that you couldn't get shot in your bed. Yeah. I read that and I went on and I was like, I did just read that, I'm just gonna have to go back and look at it again. Yeah. You know, and it was just, you know, you just kind of, you put that in there, so the story's got a real tension in it.
We were a generation that was brought up in fear. So you were afraid of not just your enemy, who were paramilitaries from the other side, the police, who were your enemy, the only armed police force in the UK, the British Army, who were armed and on the streets, who were your enemy, but also your own kind, who were your enemy repeatedly. So you were just you trusted no one, and you were always afraid. And then what you had was laughter, and you had your family. And humour in Northern Ireland is a shield, and it's a weapon.
It's a lot like the west of Scotland, I find.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that when you have a community that has no agency, you know, there were part of our community, for example, when I was born, you weren't guaranteed a vote if you were Catholic. I mean, that's quite extraordinary. If you go back, you weren't guaranteed a vote because they linked it to owning of property. So, the Catholics were poorer, so that was a way of keeping them out of voting and keeping them out of power. And so when you don't have weapons or money or votes, what you have is mockery. You know, if you have a soldier or a police force and the four of you snigger at them, they're furious. They can't figure it out. You can really get under someone, or you say something really cutting, and so you're kind of taught, you know, how to kind of joust and spar and and fence with words and humour and use it really viciously.
So The Peace in Common People is memoir, it's your life, and the novel is semi-autobiographical, inspired by your story. But what does it mean for you to be identified as a working class writer?
I think, you know, when I first wrote, you know, it was just really important to me to identify. I had this feeling that what if this is just one book that I'm going to write, and so I'm going to write a book about growing up in this working class area, because I remember as a boy, you know, feeling absent from literature, you know, in my difference, in my openness towards sexual or physical experience, and being poor, and hearing it lovingly expressed with all its complexity and darkness, and there's a kind of a language of less, you know, that people who come from your background understand. And that crosses religious divides, which is really important from where I live. But also, you know, how my book ended up in Russia. I mean, who thought in a little book about the, you know, set in the kind of two streets of North Belfast. That's it. I think he was out once. He's allowed out of the area. And I think for me, when I wanted...
Can I just go back to that for a second? So he's allowed out of the area at once. Was that an experience that was familiar to you?
Oh yeah, that was how we grew up. So we had a wall at the top of my street, a wall at the bottom of my street. They were called peace walls, which I always found quite funny. But they basically kept you in. So you were in an open-air prison. And of course, because of that, you were under a microscope constantly from the people that were there.
Yeah.
And you were trapped. And you know, one of the massive experiences for me in my life was leaving my area. I remember I realized that not everyone was dirt poor like me. I realized that some people had really lovely houses that didn't join onto another house, and people had trees, you know, and on their streets, and big back gardens, and I also, what I realized is that rich people didn't have the troubles, and that blew my mind.
God, just saying that makes me think of Graham's book. You know, the Azzy can't leave his scheme because he's in one young team, and it's the difference of what a street at the bottom of the street. He leaves the street and he gets a kicking. I mean, did that sound familiar to you?
When I read Paul's book, you know, and when I had my friend from Belfast, you know, when we spoke about it, she said we didn't have young teams, we didn't have gangs. It was just paramilitaries, you know, and we didn't have these divisions weren't between territorial gangs of young men roving the streets. It was between Catholic and Protestant, you know, and it was a civil war setting, essentially.
But a strong community as well. I mean,
yeah.
That's what I tried to put across in my memoir, my book as well. You know, the families, you know, the bond between those families, because you had to protect each other and entertain each other, and whether that protection was sometimes being in the street and fighting off people or other people, or or playing a game so you didn't hear the person getting beaten up outside, or that kind of protection. But the love, and that's what I really wanted to capture in my memoir and in my novel, was just how beautiful working class lives are.
How did you feel as a boy growing up there and moving into the world of performance and the world of writing? Did you feel that there was a pathway for you? Did you think that was something you could do?
Oh, absolutely not. I was so lacking in confidence, that when I started writing, I wrote dialogue. Mm-hmm. And the reason was because I just didn't think I could write prose. Mm-hmm. That I had this huge lack of confidence, which when I talk to other working class writers or working class artists, that lack of confidence is there. Yeah. It's something in you. And there's a great expression which a singer I know said to me last year, which is, you have to see it to be it, you know. And when you don't have these examples growing up of, working class writers, or you don't hear enough about them, and that you just don't feel that you have a seat at the table. One of the reviews of my novel is basically like, we've already had a working class boy from Ireland. And I went, that's 30 years ago. He lived in Dublin. Okay. And it was like, he's not gay. It wasn't during the Troubles. Really. Yeah. So you can only have one every 30 years. And interesting, I did an event in Durham with common people, and we were having this conversation, and someone in the audience said, we have had working class writing. We had Trainspotting. I said, again, 30 years ago. That's one example, and you're still using it 30 years later to say you don't need another one. Yeah. I mean, that's extraordinary.
Yeah. So you've just finished editing this collection of all Ireland stories, all working class voices, called The 32. Tell us about it.
Yeah, I'm super excited about that. Roddy Doyle, Kevin Barry, Lisa McInerney. I mean,
just a few casual names.
Incredible. And then 16 new writers. And of course, and because, I've called it The 32. It's a little bit cheeky because, the 32 counties of Ireland. It's an all-Ireland thing. And, I'm so excited. It's coming out next spring.
I am really excited to read it. It got me thinking as well, would you think there would be a Scottish one ever?
Yes.
Do you think that
I think you should start that off and I'll be part of it.
I think you should do it. I think, come on. But would you, is that like a story that you'd pick up and read, or would you feel able to contribute to that?
Definitely, yeah, in my own right, 100%. Obviously, I have the intersections with race as well, which I think cross over and are so complex in the ways that they sort of intertwine.
I'd love you to talk a wee bit about that intersectionality, if you would, for a second.
It's...
Because people hear that word a lot and they might not know what it means.
Yeah,
so.
I suppose for me, I grew up with a black single mother, my dad's white, and, I'd say my dad very much borders the kind of middle class more so. But growing up with my mum, my mum was cleaned stairs for a living. And so very much I experienced what I would describe as, being impoverished in its own sense, But then I would also see, the way that my dad lived, which was quite dramatically different from the way that my mum lived. And so, and I think sort of touching on what you were talking about earlier about the sort of imposter syndrome is something I battle every single day. It's so difficult as a writer being thrust into these sort of situations where you've never had any training for how to deal with that, how to conduct yourself, how to articulate yourself, know. And I think it's something certainly that a lot of writers which don't come from those typical backgrounds suffer with and, experience.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. I remember I was talking to one of the writers who was in Common People, and she was so excited that she'd got an agent off the back of being in Common People. She was absolutely thrilled. And I turned to her and I said, it's great that you've got an agent, but actually what your agent has got is you. So don't be feeling grateful your whole life. It's great to be happy about it, but they work for you. And the reason I was able to say that is because I was once with a friend who's a very tough New York writer, a working class guy, and he had said the same thing to me. And I think it's when people have those conversations that you can kind of, share that. And I think that's really important. Will you read us a wee bit from the novel just before you go?
Yes, a tiny bit here. I have very clear instructions. Don't go to the top of the street because there's always riots. Don't go to the bottom of the street because there's no man's land and there's always riots. Don't go near the Bray or the Bone Hills, because that leads to the Protestant Old Park, where they throw stones across the road from their side. Don't go into the owl houses, because a wee boy fell through the stairs in one and broke his 2 legs, and I think his neck too. Ma could be exaggerating. Oh, and don't go onto the eggy field, because that's where the glue sniffers are. I said to Ma, you should just tie me to the gate or lock me in a cupboard. What am I going to do with you, wee boy, Ma says. Put me in a children's home, says me. I tried, son. They wouldn't take you.
I'm very glad they didn't. Thank you so much, Paul. My next guest grew up on a scheme in Airdrie, up to his high tops in trouble, drinking bucky and running with his own young team. He was just the kind of Ned I used to run away from, and also slightly fancy. He's overcome his own struggles with drugs, alcohol and violence, and taken all his experiences and turned them into a quintessentially Scottish novel full of larger-than-life characters and world-class patter. It's a Sunday Times bestseller. It's a powerful exploration of masculinity, class, and very creative swearing. Just before I get Graham Armstrong over, I tried to keep up with the Readers on the Run book group to find out what they thought. There are speed readers and then there are speedy readers. I'm here in Clackmannanshire today to meet a group who I suspect qualify as both. I can hear them coming now. Come on, you're nearly there. Run towards the books. You made it. So which came first, reading or running?
Running, definitely running. We all met years ago through our running group. So that's how it started. They were putting things on Facebook about books and reviews. So we just thought it'd be a good idea to just start our own book club.
So what does being in this group mean to you?
It's meant quite a lot to me, actually. So being in the running club meant quite a lot to me, but then getting to know all of these ladies even more through talking about books has actually been really great, and I think we've got actually a much closer friendship now because of it.
I think we've seen engagements, we've seen loss, and I think it just really makes us all come together more than just the books, and I think that's just wonderful about us. And then we've spoken more about everything else in our life as well, and I think the book's just part of it for us, to be honest, more than anything else.
You bring your own experience to a book, so you have to give a little bit of yourself away in a book, you know, when you're discussing a book. We're all different, we've all had different upbringings, different lives, and you bring that to the book.
The runners have been reading The Young Team by Graham Armstrong. So this is a book about Neds, but it's not the stereotypical tabloid fodder. It's the story of a boy called Azzy Williams, grown up in Airdrie, and it's a story about gangs, it's a story about friendship, it's a story about survival. It's incredibly sophisticated and it's incredibly sweary.
Just loved the book. It was an amazing read. I couldn't put it down. Even when I was listening to, hearing or reading about what he was going through, I was getting like, felt like I was there on the area with him.
If I were to try to convince someone to read the book, my advice would be go in with an open mind. Don't think that because it bears no resemblance at all to your life or your experiences, don't think that it has nothing to say to you.
What were your thoughts about the book before you read it?
When I first started reading it, it was quite hard to get into the first couple of pages because of the dialect, and I thought, oh dear, I don't know. But within the first chapter, I thought, this is amazing. You know, you got into the dialect right away, and you were in with the banter, and you almost felt as if you were Azzy.
Yeah, so for me, it was the kind of book that I would pick, because I would tend to be on the lookout for something contemporary, something set in Scotland, something maybe that's a little bit dark or will show me an aspect of the world I don't normally get to see. And this very much kind of hit the mark for me as the kind of thing I would seek out.
It kept you going. Like, it wasn't at any point a slog to read that book because of the way that he wrote it. And I think the words literally danced on the page. It was just like art. It was beautifully written, actually, the way that he did everything in terms of pace.
And I think there's a strong current of fear in the book.
Yeah.
As he spends a lot of his time fronting,
Yeah.
like he's afraid because he knows that if he goes 2 streets down or, you know, looks at somebody the wrong way or whatever.
And you can feel it, that tension.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it ratchets up. So I'm going to reacquaint myself with some of Azzy's choicier swear words. I'll let you get on with your run.
Okay then, let's go.
So what I loved about that group was how open they were to a book that they would just never normally have picked up. And I think that's one of the things I'm really learning about book groups, is that a big bit of it is being challenged, not just on what you read, but on what you think about the characters and stories that you think you know. So they absolutely loved the book, the whole lot of them. And what was really interesting was how surprised they were by how much they liked it. They read the first page and they were like, oh, there's 5 significant swear words. I'm not sure it's for me, and put it down, but then they went back to it and they loved it. Is that a reaction that you've had a lot?
Some of these ladies messaged me on social media and they did reviews and stuff, but absolutely, you know, neighbours, and said, oh, you know, there's a lot of swearing in it, a lot of swearing. That tends to be what non-literary people over 40 pick out about the book, you know, and it does slap people in the face.
Yeah.
You know, my mum didn't enjoy the C expletive, you know, 1,400 times.
Was it 1,400 times?
It was 1,400.
Because you can do that on search and replace now.
They thought it might be a record.
Yeah, I think it might well be a record.
People caricature it and they say, oh, you know, it's a term of endearment, and it's not. It's just our everyday language. You know, it's just a marker.
Right, give us a wee reading.
There's a strange sanity to it offer us. Like, this is a natural continuation of those first rites of passage. The days of being wee Neds in a gang are long gone. People our age are moving on, getting on with their lives. You have police officers, trainee teachers, all manner of good professions accepting cunts our age. But we then, still hanging on to something that's already behind us. Sitting with our school pals, drinking, taking drugs, chasing that old buzz. It's an ideal, a nostalgia, collective loyalty and belonging. The notion of that collective union has slipped away from us. Those who keep chasing it beyond our age are trapped in Neverland forever. I dream back to the days we was all around a wee fire with bottles and the troops area. That was the start of all this, but something's changed and gone sour along the way. What happened to all my old pals, the ones who used to mean something? What promises did the next stage of life offer? To keep going down this road to nowhere? A deeper darkening than everything that had come before? To get a scheme bird pregnant and doom your wains to the same inescapable cycle of degradation, acceptance and repetition? I don't want that. I know that now. I'm trapped and forced in these useful moments of incarceration to dwell on all this, to think it all through and confront that persistent self that awaits you when the colour and the noise of the madness ceases and you start to see the truth. I look at the graffiti of ghosts scratched into the walls and mourn, thinking about Monica, if she could see me now. Because she's probably on a night out with Dominic in Glasgow, Merchant Square or Ashton Lane, getting food and drinks and dressed up nice. Here am I, with my white cotton socks turned black, in a cell, like a condemned man, awaiting his fate. I take a red pill of awakening, and there's no going back, because once you wake up, you can see it everywhere, and it's obvious. There's no light at the end of this tunnel. My thoughts of freedom are ironic, saying they're coming straight from a Strathclyde Police Custody Suite in Coatbridge Police Station.
Did you do the audiobook?
Yes, I did.
Thank God.
It was quite emotional, so yeah, it was 4 days and it was really tough. And the guys, it was done remotely through COVID, you know, so I was just in a studio alone, and there was the coach and then the sound engineer. And after a few bits, you know, they were like, there was a palpable still, you know, and it was like, wow, man, it was emotional. And then one guy went, you could be an actor. I said, I'm not acting. You know, and that was the reality, because it was, you know, and some of the conflict in the book, it was quite scary, you know. These really violent interactions between characters, but it was all real. It's all based on real stuff.
You say it's all real. It's not a memoir, it's a novel. So the central character there is Azzy.
Yeah. It's inspired by real events. It's not a direct lift, you know. It's, you're right. The memoir, I've actually written a memoir.
Right.
And that's a completely separate enterprise and it feels different. Fiction's very much fiction, you know.
How do they feel different if you're drawing on some of the same material? Well, obviously for the memoir, it's all real, but for the...
I think because the young team doesn't always ride in save the day. You know, one journalist called this a Western. I don't think it is a Western. You know, it's not gung-ho. Its handling's much more sensitive than that. But the reality is the memoir's like a collection of moments. Not to say it's Kelman style, but it's more stream of consciousness. You know, it's more just a mosaic of moments, you know, building up into something bigger that come out of sequence. This is very much beginning, middle and end, you know, albeit it's very pacey.
When I was reading that, because I ran about with boys like you when I was growing up just down the road, and I have never before read a book which captures the joy of that, because it's totally brilliant, it's great fun, until it's not, and then it's utterly terrifying.
Yeah, I think that's the truth, you know, it's not a misery memoir.
No.
It's not poverty porn either.
No. Let's talk about what a young team is for people who don't know what a young team is. You know, tell us how Azzy gets into it and what it offers him.
It's a territorial gang, that's what it is, but, you know, and that's how the police would describe it, but in reality it's just your mates for the same place who go to school, who kick about and play football when you're wee boys, and then when you reach 11, 12, 13, you start drinking buckfast and taking drugs, and then you get this name, and you've got this gang identity, you know, and people often ask me, why did you choose to fictionalise it in the way you did? And that, you know, I sat with that and I thought, I don't want to use real gang names, because if I do, young men could think this is a shrine in Airdrie or Coatbridge, you know, that. So I'm going to make it obviously fictional. So the young team, whereas it would have been Airdrie young team or Coatbridge young team, you know. So I was like, I'm going to make it obviously fictional, but young team versus a young toy. And I'm going to make it a blend of my experience, because I ran about gangs in Airdrie and Coatbridge after I was expelled from high school. So it's a blend, it's a mash-up, you know. And it wasn't always as simple as it appears on the young team. The young team's fictionalised. You've got 2 gangs. There are no other gangs. In reality, there would have been 10, 15 gangs in Airdrie, same in Coatbridge, you know, so.
And this is the question that I asked myself at the time, because I could never really work it out. What are you fighting for?
I think it's territorialism. You know, you stay over there, we stay over here. There wasn't a great deal of that in Airdrie. When I was expelled and I went down to Coatbridge, the head teacher, who's, by the way, I'd almost had direct with McGyver in the book.
McGyver's a great character, I really like him.
He, you know, he took one look at me. I had 2 gold 2p rings. I was wearing a Berghaus Merrifield jacket, and he laughed and he went, "You're going to be popular down here, son. But let me tell you, son, if you think Airdrie was bad, you're out the frying pan into the fire." And I had no idea what he meant. I was, you know, 14. I went out and then I was like, "I'm going to go down there for my lunch." And he went, "Oh, no, you can't go down there." And I said, "How no?" And he said, "Because that's their gang a bit, you know. If you run about with them, you can't run about with them." And I was like, oof, you know.
So the Azzy character in the novel, let's talk about his family, because his dad's not about, and his mum is kind of mortified because she doesn't understand why Azzy's turning out the way that he is, because she works and
same as
she
me.
sets a good example.
Azzy's dad died, you know, and my dad died when I was young. And, you know, I didn't come from poverty. I think I made that clear in the book, you know. My mum always worked, she owned her own home, but that big adverse childhood experience for a young man of losing your father in your formative years has an impact, you know. And Azzy's mother, absolutely, you know, the point where she's invited into the school, Azzy has this moment, he talks about whips of guilt, you know, and he's looking at his mum, and that's an interesting class, because you see the whole class segments, you know. You've got Bruni's dad, who's obviously low income and, you know, in benefits. You've got Addison's mum, who's the very business-like persona. She's middle class. And then Azzy's mum's just a wee office woman, just a normal mum. You know, when he looks at his mum and he thinks, "Oh God, they're going to think she's a bad ma," but it's no, she's a bad ma, I'm a bad son. You know, and he tries to, there's that love, of course. And that's
that love is striking in the novel, and it's one of the things that that gives it its heart. It's because it's a novel with a really strong heart, but it's also quite surprising, because you've got Azzy, who's like a wee hard man, and he's out with his pals and he's doing all this, that, and the next thing, and then he still doesn't want to piss his mum off, and he still wants to please his teachers. There's still a sense of. It was really shocking to me actually when I started reading it. I thought I was meeting an 18-year-old or a 19-year-old, and then you turn around and tell me that he's what, 12 at the start of the book?
14.
14.
Yeah, 14.
You know, that was really shocking.
I think you know, lost youth is one of the main themes of the young team. It's one that people don't pick out, but it talks about it's the death of youth. Youth doesn't survive this. You know, drugs and alcohol, suicide, murder, all these big social issues, you know, they're bombarding you when you're 14 in your life. You know, I was like a little kid who had like Airfix models in the ceiling, and, you know, I was just used to, and then you take them all down, and within a few weeks you're in tracksuits, you're getting battered, you're coming in assaulted. You know, my single, obviously my mum never remarried, so she's seen all this. She doesn't understand it, you know? And she can't understand why this wee boy, of course, terrified. She said she used to pray every night that I would come home, you know, and brought home in the back of police cars, phoned by the police, your son's in the cells, you need to come pick him up. Obviously, living with a drug addict's very, very tough. You're stealing. You know, substance abuse is really, really serious. And
what were you doing? What was the substances?
We started smoking cannabis, drinking alcohol, then we would progress to taking party drugs, so cocaine, ecstasy.
But the come down from that must have been absolute. I mean, you write about, I mean, I have to say, writing about drugs is generally as boring as writing about sex. It's like, just do the drugs, just have the sex. Don't write about it. It's generally rubbish. But you write really well about come downs. It's the first description of a come down that I've actually read that I thought,
it was brutal. It was absolutely brutal, you know. I used to go out with this girl and she looked at me and she said, "Why are you always sweating?" On Monday, because I was literally sweating. I was like renting Trainspotting, the sweat was lashing off you. There's a nice girl that's interested in you, like just sitting sweating like a heroin addict.
Azzy has this teacher, the headmaster, Mr. McVeigh, who takes an interest in him, and he has other teachers that kind of notice that he's bright and that he's interested in stories, in the sense that, you know, all these boys do is spend their life telling stories about one another. I mean, it's absolutely full of gossip and stories, and I think in the same way that Paul's novel is as well, and in a very different way Jessica's is. It's families talking about one another, and people in the same social class talking about, have you heard what she did, what he did? And I loved all of that, but I wondered who the teachers were in your life.
My head teacher that I mentioned, he was absolutely fantastic, and he was the real MacGyver.
He must be so proud of you now.
Oh, definitely. I went to see him the day he retired, you know, and he said, "You were my last success," you know. We had this moment, it was beautiful. And then he came to my book launch. He's an old man now in his 70s with a walking stick, but still 6'4", you know, built like he was a rugby coach. I was dogging it one day, and I was going to meet this girl, and I had one foot out the door, and he put his big hand on my shoulder, and he marched me back to English, believe it or not. I was dogging English. And he went, "One day, you'll remember what I've done for you." And I never forgot, you know.
The book is written exactly as you read it, so it's Suhan and Am and Fanny Boz, which I just love, and you know, all these words that when you sit down as a person to write, you're told, don't use these words. This is not the language that we transact stories in.
Yeah.
So how did you find that when you came to sat down and write? Because a brave thing to do.
Really natural, because people say this craft is absolutely fantastic, and I'm like, honestly, you're giving me too much credit. It's just my own voice, written phonetically on the page.
But it's so hard to connect with that voice, is it not, when you're trying to be a writer, because we're so often told, at least I remember it being like, no, you don't write like that. You don't, you know, you can't use, you know, hings or whatever it is instead of things. Or,
I think that's it. You know, we've got this social conformity to Scottish dialect, and it's like your mum told me, it's not I, it's yes. You know, and we had that drilled into us, you know, and you don't go to speak like that in a job interview, you know, you need to sit up, you need to speak properly, you need to wear a jacket, you know, and then when I came to write this, I wrote the young team at the top of the page, and then the rain and the wind are fucking howling, you know, and that was it. It was started in the rhythm, and I think it's not just about the words, it's about the cadence. You know, when I was reading Paul's book, you could hear his accent. It's not just about the words, it's the rhythm.
Yeah,
you know, I thought, fantastic.
But you've got to do that. I think it's, if you come from, particularly from more oral tradition, I think you have to read your books out loud. And I mean, sitting here with a poet right in front of me, like, do you write your poetry onto the page, or do you say it out loud and then transcribe it?
It depends. Like, sometimes I do just like speak it out. Like, and definitely when I'm writing it, I can hear myself saying it in my head. Like,
there's actual methodology from an actual poet live just happening right now there. No, I mean, for me, I write it and then I read it out loud. Do you do that, Jessica? Do you?
Yeah, no, I definitely.
Or with dialogue? Or just the whole thing?
I probably should do it more than I do, but I love writing dialogue more than anything.
It's the best.
Yeah, I think in a funny way, because I'm deaf, hopefully that helps me listen more carefully sometimes. But I'd say I think you missed a trick. I think we should have read each other's books.
That'll be afterwards. That's in the special press the red button extra edition. You mentioned renting earlier, so that leads me neatly into talking about Trainspotting. I mean, was Trainspotting one of the texts that you were looking at and thinking, maybe I could get there?
I'd stayed on, right, and I'm sitting in my higher English class. Higher English, you know, I'm doing all right.
Get you.
And teacher says, right, we're doing personal study. You know, you need to choose a book. And I was looking about and I was thinking, what books have I read? Goosebumps and Ian Rankin. Right, and I was looking about and I was like, see, there's a boy reading The Godfather. Oh, that might be all right, heard of that. And the girl sitting next to me, she says, what are you doing? And I said, I don't know, what are you doing? She went, Trainspotting, you should do it, you'll love it. Changed my whole life. You
Really?
know? Yep, because I told my friend and she bought me it and she said, there you go, make sure you read it. And I remember 2 boys that we used to sit with just died of heroin overdoses, you know, and I'd been in a flat and I'd seen one of them overdose, and it was me that phoned the ambulance. Someone pulled the phone cord out of the wall, just like you see in Trainspotting. It was like, you know, and I remember sitting and I was thinking, God, see if that had been me, nobody would have phoned the ambulance, you know, I'd have died. And it was a really black moment in my life. And I was sitting in this personal, you know, the free period it was, and I pulls out Trainspotting. It was a classic one with the skull in the front, and I opened up and it was like the sweat was fucking lashing off the sick boy, and I was like, wow, transported. You know, and I wasn't a heroin addict for Edinburgh, you know, in the 80s. I was a young Ned for Airdrie in the 90s, but God, I felt identification, you know, and I read it cover to cover and cover, and see the teacher, he hated me, and I remember him sitting, he's like, that book he's reading, you know, or a comic book, you know, the Dandy the Beanie Officer. And I read it and I read it and I read it and I wore it out, honestly, and then I wrote about it in my exam. I was like, I don't care, the SQA will hear the call of this. F. Failed me. So I went back next year, right, and I was like, right, I better do the texts they've set this time. So the texts were The Crucible, Arthur Miller, and then The Great Gatsby. Wow. Here I was. I'd been in Leaf for the heroin addicts. Now I'm in the roaring 20s, you know, with Gatsby. And I think if you tell us stylistically where the young team lies, it's halfway between Irvine Welsh and Gatsby, you know. That was what I loved. So it's highly written. I liked that.
Can we talk for a wee minute about the goddess that is Janice Galloway?
Absolutely. Like, it was funny, right, because I'd heard of her, right, but I didn't know she was like the larger-than-life character that she is. She's like the fairy godmother of Scottish writing, you know, and I turned up late, right, as I often did, and she went, fucking nice of you to join us. Grab my seat.
That's very Janice.
I was like a posh student or something, and I was like, oh, sorry, I'm late. And she heard my accent, and she went, where are you from? And I went, Airdrie. Just like that, you know, and she went, I'll just you wait behind Mr. Airdrie. And, right, and everybody's like, oh, nah, because they think you're in trouble, you know. And it got trending, it was just me and her, and she went, tell me a story, because I know you've got one. And I was like, well, I read Trainspotting, you know, and I started studying English, and my teacher said I wouldn't come here and whatever, you know, and I started writing. And she's like, 6 months, I'll meet you in the Mitchell Library, have something ready for me, right? And I want to read it, because you're ready, you need to take the next step. And I'm like, right, I'm Janice Galloway, right?
That's amazing.
And I seen, when we were in the Mitchell, I seen people notice her, you know, and think, there's Janice Galloway, and I'm like, sitting with a celeb, you know. It was exciting. And then all through, you know, she would send an email and say, how are you getting on? How's the book? Still plugging away. You know what it's like, God, that was 2013. This didn't get signed till 2018-19. That was part of it.
So I've got a question for you from the book group. The question's from Christine, who says she knows that a lot of the book is based on your real life experience. Was the process of writing it cathartic for you?
Yes, it was, absolutely. I think the writing of the novel was fundamental in my healing, because I had stopped using drugs on Christmas Day 2012. And when you stop using drugs, any drugs, it's a very lonely, tough space, because all your friends are still using drugs. So I was sitting in my wee flat in Tillicountry, and I was climbing the walls, you know, and I thought, right, I'm going to do something. I started writing The Young Team. In 3 months, I wrote 80,000 words, you know. And 3 months is a huge, huge milestone. That thin margin wasn't so thin anymore, you know. I was 3 months off drugs. You're looking great, you're feeling better. You know, and it was with me for forever. It's still with me. God, I still have hard days, you know, and sometimes when you look at your book and you touch it and you go, it's real, you know, you've achieved it. So, absolutely, fundamental.
Thank you. And thank you for being here.
My pleasure, thank you.
Our poet tonight tackles racism, colonialism, womanhood, and growing up in Scotland. It's Courtney Stoddard. Courtney, what are you going to read for us tonight?
So I'm going to be reading a poem called Class Ceilings, which I would say really calls out the prevailing power structures and systems of exploitation.
Call it out.
Okay, thanks. Class ceilings. Class. First class, second class, business class. It's classified in classrooms, class division, class in school, class in taste, economic class. Etiquette is shaped by class. Stand, sit, and walk. It's class, isn't it? The way we are classed in, cast in shade. Make waves for mobility for those who come after me, but radically, class dictates life choices almost magically. Exploitation rules over imagination, and we are left with cold summer's days, where the sun does not shine and class and race intertwine so perfectly, so properly imposed, so faithfully by the powers that be, and we are alienated bodily by those who happily drop bomb oversee. They're taxing me without even asking me, classing me under war, under policy, under fear of refugee and worship of the ruling class. With their class ceilings and class in high places, please mind your airs and your graces. But we did not come to fight flesh and blood, but spiritual wickedness in high and low places. So never mind your airs and your graces. Class your heads above the parapets when democracy is fleeting. When tides and false ties are weaving amongst political hypocrisy, see, in futures they will ask those who teach who be these people of history, and why did they believe the lies which bind and bleed in favour of bread and circus? Why did they believe that lives were worthless? And why did they believe that love had lost all purpose?
That was amazing. That all just came right out of you, just like that. Thank you so much, Courtney.
No problem. Thank you.
That's it for tonight. So, thank you to the Readers on the Run and to my guests, Courtney Stoddard, Jessica Fellows, Paul McVeigh, and Graham Armstrong. Until next time, happy reading.